When he opened his eyes, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating silence that pressed down on his chest like a weight. The room was small, square, and strangely bare. The walls were concrete, painted an off-white that had yellowed with time. There were no windows, no furniture except for a wooden chair in the center, and a simple clock nailed high above the door. Its pendulum swayed gently, ticking louder than it should have in the stillness. He sat up slowly, his head pounding, his throat dry. He didn't remember coming here. In fact, he didn't remember much at all, only fragments. Walking home late at night. The sound of footsteps behind him. A sharp sting at the back of his neck, and then darkness. The air smelled faintly of metal and dust, the kind of scent you'd expect in a basement. He stood and tried the door, solid steel, no handle on the inside, only a narrow slit at eye level. Locked tight. He kicked it once, hard, but it didn't even rattle. Turning back to the room, his eyes landed on the clock again. It read 12 o'clock exactly. The red second hand began to tick forward, slow and deliberate. Something about it made his stomach twist. It wasn't just marking time, it was counting down. He looked around for something, anything, that might explain where he was or why. But there was nothing. The walls were smooth, untouched, no cracks, no graffiti, no signs of anyone ever being here. Just the chair, the clock, and him. Then in the silence, the clock's steady ticking seemed to grow louder. Each second echoed through the room like a hammer strike. His pulse began to match it, racing faster, panic clawing its way up his throat. He pressed his ear to the door, desperate for sound. Nothing. He shouted, his voice bouncing back at him in a hollow echo. Still nothing. He sat in the chair finally, staring up at the clock. The second hand crept forward, merciless. It had only been 5 minutes, but already something deep in his gut told him he didn't want to know what would happen when it struck the next hour. The ticking grew unbearable. Each second slammed in his ears like a hammer, and by the time the clock struck 12:59, sweat was dripping down his temples. He stood in the center of the room, fists clenched, staring at the minute hand as it crept toward the top. 12 hours, 59 minutes, and 50 seconds. He braced himself. His breathing grew shallow. 12 hours, 59 minutes, and 55 seconds. The air in the room seemed to shift, denser, heavier, charged like the moment before a lightning strike. 12 hours, 59 minutes, and 59 seconds. The second hand clicked into place. 1 o'clock. The lights flickered, and then everything snapped. For a split second, he felt like his body was being torn apart and pulled back together all at once. The sound of rushing wind roared in his ears, though the air didn't move. His vision blurred into streaks of gray before abruptly settling. He staggered, gasping for breath, and looked around the room. The chair was back in the center, perfectly upright. The faint dent in the wall he'd made from pounding his fist was gone. The scratch marks he had dug into the paint with his nails had vanished. His bruised knuckles were smooth, unbroken. Even the clock was back at 12 o'clock. His heart sank. It wasn't just time moving forward. Time itself was resetting. Panicked, he grabbed the chair and hurled it against the door. It smashed into pieces. But as he blinked, the fragments shimmered, flickered, and the chair stood whole again in the middle of the room. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling. This isn't real." He pressed his hands to his face, trying to calm his breathing, but the truth was undeniable. Whatever this place was, it wasn't bound by the rules of the world he knew. He wasn't just trapped, he was looping. And the clock had already started ticking toward the next hour. Once the shock dulled enough for him to think, he realized he had no choice. If he was going to survive this, he had to test the limits. The clock ticked at 12:10 when he began. He dragged the chair to the center of the room and carved a line into the wall with one of the wooden legs. Deep, jagged. His hand shook as he stepped back. He waited. The minutes crept forward. At 1 o'clock, the reset came, violent, blinding, disorienting. He collapsed to the floor, clutching his head as the world snapped back into place. And when he looked up, his heart sank. The wall was smooth again. No mark. He tried again, this time writing directly onto his skin with a sharp sliver of wood. He pressed hard until the word help was carved into his arm. Blood welled up, stinging. The reset came. He looked down. His arm was flawless. Not even a scar. By the third loop, desperation overtook fear. He smashed the chair to splinters, used the pieces to batter the steel door until his arms gave out. At the reset, the chair was whole, his hands uninjured, the door pristine. By the fourth loop, he began testing pain. He pressed his palm against the sharp edge of the clock, slicing it open, watching the blood drip onto the floor. His vision blurred as he let himself bleed out, wondering what death would mean here. The reset came anyway. He woke, sitting in the chair, whole again. He laughed then, a sharp, broken sound that echoed off the empty walls. Nothing he did mattered. Nothing stayed. Except, on the fifth loop, as he collapsed against the wall in defeat, he noticed something. A faint mark, barely visible, scratched into the paint. Not his. 2 words, shallow but unmistakable. Still here. He pressed his fingers against the faint words, almost afraid they'd vanish like everything else. But they didn't. The shallow scratches were real, permanent in a place where nothing else seemed to stay. Still here. His pulse quickened. Someone else had been in this room. Someone who, like him, had tried to fight the resets and failed. The clock read 12:15 when he began searching every inch of the room. He tapped along the walls, checked the corners, lifted the chair, even peeled at the edges of the baseboards. At first, nothing. But then near the bottom corner of the far wall, he found it. Another set of scratches, deeper this time, almost frantic. Numbers. A sequence. 37, 58, 59. He didn't understand. Were they times? A code? At 12:40, he discovered more, carved faintly behind the clock itself. He had to drag the chair over and stand on it, fingertips trembling as he pried the heavy thing away from the wall. There, etched into the plaster. Don't let it touch you. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. The reset slammed into him at 1 o'clock. He woke gasping, back in the chair, the clock steady at 12 o'clock again. For a long moment, he sat in silence, staring at the words that shouldn't exist, but still did. Then, from the corner of the room, he heard it. A sound. Soft. Slow. Like someone breathing. At first, he thought it was his imagination. A trick of nerves after hours of silence and isolation. But when the reset hit again, the sound was clearer, low, steady breathing in the corner of the room. He turned his head, slowly. The corner was empty. Just blank wall and shadows. Yet the air felt heavier there, like it wrapped around something invisible. By 12:20, the sound grew louder, closer. His chest tightened as his eyes strained against the dim light. And then he saw it, a darker shape within the darkness. A tall, thin outline motionless. He stood frozen, every instinct screaming not to move. The seconds dragged. 12:25. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe. But he could hear the sound, rasping, hungry, deliberate, pulling closer each time he blinked. Panic surged. He grabbed the chair and hurled it at the corner. The wood passed straight through the shadow and clattered harmlessly against the floor. When he looked back, the shape was gone. But the whispers weren't. A voice, faint but sharp, brushed against his ear. Don't let it touch you. He spun, heart hammering, but the room was empty. Then the clock struck 12:59. The figure stood inches away from him now, pale hands stretching forward, and the reset slammed into him before it could touch. When the reset spat him back into the chair, his lungs burned as if he had been underwater. His skin crawled with the memory of those pale hands reaching for him. The scratched message replayed in his head. Don't let it touch you. But how long could he keep dodging something that grew closer with every reset? He forced himself to think. The other markings, 37, 58, 59, they had to mean something. Numbers that repeated, numbers someone before him had noticed. He grabbed the chair, climbed up, and carved them onto the wall above the clock so he wouldn't forget. This time, he didn't waste the loop. At 12:30, he tested the door again, pounding on the steel until his fists ached. At 12:37, he stopped, watching, listening. And then he heard it. A faint click, like a hidden mechanism inside the wall. The clock's second hand jerked unnaturally before continuing. His heart raced. That was it. The first number. When 12:58 came, the air grew colder. The lights flickered. His pulse thundered in his ears. He pressed his back against the door, holding his breath. For one moment, just one, he thought he saw the outline of another door in the far wall, glowing faintly. But then the figure appeared again, closer than ever. The reset ripped everything away before he could reach it. Back at 12 o'clock, he clawed at the wall where he'd seen the outline. Nothing. Just concrete. He slammed his fists against it, screaming. And then he noticed it. A hairline crack running along the base of the wall. Something that wasn't there before. Something the reset hadn't fully erased. The others had tried. They'd left him clues. The exit was real. All he had to do was find it before the thing in the corner finally touched him. The crack in the wall became his obsession. Loop after loop, he clawed at it, kicked at it, shoved the chair against it with every ounce of strength he had. At first, the reset always repaired the damage. But little by little, something remained, faint scratches, splinters of plaster, a sliver of darkness peeking through. On his 20th attempt, he finally did it. At 12:58, the plaster gave way, revealing a narrow opening. Behind it, blackness. Not a hallway, not a door. Just endless dark. But he didn't care. Anything was better than the room. The figure appeared again at 12:59. It was closer than ever, its face beginning to take shape, sunken, eyeless, jaw unhinging as if to scream. He shoved his arm into the crack, pulling at it desperately, forcing his body through as the reset approached. His chest scraped against the jagged edges, blood dripping down, but he didn't stop. He hurled himself into the darkness, just as the second hand struck 1 o'clock. And this time, no reset. He landed hard on cold concrete. The air was damp, heavy. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering. Behind him, the wall sealed shut. The room was gone. Relief surged, until he noticed the sound. Ticking. He turned his head. In front of him stretched an endless corridor lined with doors. Each one identical. Each one marked with a clock above it. And in the distance, muffled screams echoed, overlapping. Hundreds of voices crying out in terror. He stumbled back, shaking his head. No, 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 no. Because every clock on every door read the same time. 12 o'clock. And in the shadows of the corridor, dozens of pale figures turned slowly toward him. He wasn't the first. He wouldn't be the last. The room wasn't a prison. It was a system. And now he was part of it.